Warning: the following podcast contains adult language and childish comedy. Listener discretion is advised. And now, please adjust your headphone volume to an unreasonable level and enjoy the most dynamic and electrifyingly entertaining podcast ever to conquer cyberspace. This is
Amish Baby Machine.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the most powerful podcast ever created, the Amish Baby Machine Pop Culture Podcast, starring me, Dags. Powerful podcast tonight. We're really excited. All the way from Greenland is Sean from the powerful Pittsburgh Nerd Podcast. Put your hands together, take them apart, put them back together, take them apart. Keep doing that for Sean. Welcome, Sean.
It is a pleasure to be here, sir. I can't thank you enough. I'm looking forward to earning my way into the 5-timer club so I can get access to the back room and hang out with Chevy and the gang.
That sounds dirty.
That's an old skit from Saturday Night Live.
It is, I know.
Yeah, okay.
Powerful. Is it Chevy or Chevy?
I believe it's Chevy, but Chevy drove his Chevy to the levee, and the levee was dry.
Wow. Powerful references tonight on the most powerful podcast ever created.
I'm trying to bring my A game today. You forced me to bring my A game. On my show, I just kind of I'm lazy about it, but with you, I need to step it up and make sure I'm bringing the power. You're lazy. Have you come up with the name of your fans yet, your listeners? We do have a small group of super fans, who write into us every week or every couple of weeks, or, who interact with us. We do have that small group that we give nicknames to, like, we have an otter, we have stork, who you're familiar with, and a mongoose. So, we do have a menagerie of
annoying animals. Yes.
Yes.
Powerful.
That's what we try. But yeah.
Now, I heard the news about Spider-Man, and the first person I thought of was you. We need to talk about today on this powerful podcast, Spider-Man. What's going on? Is this all hype? Is it all publicity to get you to watch the Spider-Mans?
Well, I think it's more posturing than it is hype or anything else. I think what we have is two companies who are trying to slice up $1 billion pie.
All right, let's stop right now. Let's tell the kids if they were living if they were in their bunker and they didn't hear the latest news. Fill them in, please.
Okay, so it broke that Sony has severed ties, if you will, in regards to sharing Spider-Man with the Marvel Disney cinematic universe. So nobody's quite sure what prompted that, except that there were negotiations that were going on, that Disney, who was only getting 5% of every dollar, or first dollar, so some odd phrasing that they use, it was a first dollar. They were only getting 5% of the first dollar, and they were looking for more of a 50-50 split. Sony is trying to keep as much money as possible, and it also behooves them, many people think, because then they can transition the Spider-Man franchise into what they're trying to build with their, pseudo Spider-Verse with Morbius and Venom and whatnot that they've been planning on doing.
Kevin Feige is out.
Kevin, as it stands right now, Kevin Feige is out. Yes. Apparently Sony released a statement earlier today where they said that there's been a gross misrepresentation, that this was a decision by Disney, that Kevin Feige had other responsibilities, and that they had done other Spider-Man projects where he wasn't listed as an executive producer but still had input with. So, but technically, he was an executive producer on Spider-Man Far From Home and Spider-Man Homecoming. which was still produced by Sony. Like they were the ones who actually put up the money for the production, and then Marvel has their input into how that can integrate into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's where Kevin Feige came in.
Now, did Kevin Feige have anything to do with Into the Spider-Verse?
My understanding is no.
So that's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I think it's interesting because the thing you have to remember is Sony owns all the rights to Spider-Man still. So like the animation rights they own completely separately from, like, the animation movie rights, I should say. They own completely separately from the regular Spider-Man live action rights. So that's why they were able to go ahead and make the Spider-Verse movie, and they didn't really need Marvel's input into that. Now, they had, a few years ago, they had gone into an agreement with the live action Spider-Man because of their failures to really get it to take off. And they allowed Disney, they kind of loaned Spider-Man back to them, which is what this deal was really all about. Was they still owned the rights, but they were just loaning it to them.
So I think it's interesting because Into the Spider-Verse was a huge hit, and it was all done by Sony, is what you're saying is. So do they really need Disney? I kind of like it because Disney can be kind of like the Borg, where they just assimilate everything. And I kind of like,
right.
You have Sony, you had Fox, everyone has their different spin, letting a certain director micromanaging him, or the other person is hands off, and in the way the whole artistic project flows. So I kind of like the diversity in that, not having one company rule the world. So I'm hoping the Sony thing kind of, I would like to see it go in a different direction.
Okay.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm in the camp of, from a live action standpoint, I have really enjoyed the Tom Holland Spider-Man, and I liked Homecoming a lot. I was a big fan of Far From Home as well. I thought it did a really good job of telling the story it tried to tell. I liked that Spider-Man was finally being integrated into the cinematic universe, because he's such an important character in Marvel that I liked that he was kind of back in that fold. But I feel like myself that Into the Spider-Verse is more of a fluke than it really is a proven track record of what Sony can do with this character.
Well, they put a lot of thought into it.
Well, I agree. I mean, and they pulled off something brilliant. I mean, I think, the animation that went into that, the style of animation that they used, the story that they told, the integrating of the multiverse like they did. I think they did a really good job with it. I'm the last person who's going to say that was a bad movie. It deserves all the accolades that it got. But I think if we look at what Sony's done over the years with this franchise, going back to the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire trilogy, and with the Andrew Garfield movies, and even Venom. Venom wasn't a lot of people liked it, but it was just a meh movie for me. I worry that Sony's gotten. They want to do something on their own. They've wanted to do something on their own. With the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, they wanted to create a Spider-Verse, and they wanted to do a Sinister Six movie and everything else they wanted to do. And they've just never been able to get it right. And they get one movie right with the animation side, and it was Into the Spider-Verse, and it almost feels like they feel like they can do it again. I don't know if that's possible.
I like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. To me, he was closer to Peter Parker. Tom Holland, to me, is too small. It's too wimpy. Like, I didn't like to bring him in to Marvel. He's kind of just like this little afterthought, kind of like, do you remember when the Beast went to the Avengers? And he was kind of a joke. Right. He was kind of a joke. He was kind of like comic relief instead of a super powerful dude. what he really is. So to me, like Spider-Man, what I didn't like is how he was Tony Stark's little kid, you know, instead of being a powerful dude in himself. You know, he's more like, oh, Mr. Stark, Mr. Stark. So I want, you know, more of a, I like Tobey Maguire more of a standalone Spider-Man and not brought into the Marvel universe as just like a little joke.
Right, I get that. I like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man myself because Sam Raimi, who directed those 3 movies, he was a fan of the Silver Age comics. So if you look at the first 2 Spider-Man movies, you know, they have that Silver Age feel about them. Peter Parker has that Silver Age feel, you know. When you get to Spider-Man 3, you know, Sony forced Venom on him. That he didn't want to do a Venom movie. That was kind of forced on him by Sony because that's what the fans wanted. And he didn't get that character at all because it's not a Silver Age character. And that movie suffered because of it. And that's when you get, you know, the wacky dancing Peter Parker and emo Peter and all that other stuff, because that just wasn't what Sam Raimi was about.
No,
like,
that was that was jumping the
he,
shark. Yes, definitely.
Right. I think if you look at how he handled Sandman, who is a Silver Age character in that same movie, it's a much better representation because Sam gets those characters. And Spider-Man 4 that they were going to make before they finally dropped out, I mean, that was going to be Vulture. That was going to be Ben Kingsley. You know, would he have gone more traditional with the green suit and everything like the comic book look? So I mean that's what Sam Raimi was doing, and that's why I think that character resonates more with you because of who was directing it and where his background was. I think if you look at the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, it was like, well, we need to modernize this, but they made him such a mopey jagoff that I just couldn't get into his version of Peter Parker.
I didn't like his hair.
I think
I need a flat top. Parker.
And then when you get to Tom Holland, I think again this was kind of Marvel kind of trying to, well, we need to modernize his character in a way. They made him a 15-year-old. And while I understand your points, and I'm certainly not going to disagree with you, at the same time I feel like this is what a kid today would be like if he had these superpowers. I think giving him Tony Stark as like a mentor, and in the second movie, like, how do I live up to this legacy when I'm only a 16-year-old kid? I thought that was a really good thing to do.
Well, I actually liked the back and forth. The last Spider-Man movie, I actually liked the kids being kids more than the actual Spider-Man action. I mean, right. I thought Mysterio to me is lame. He was always a lame character. You know, he had the fishbowl on his head. He was all just special effects. I mean, of all the villains, to me, he was the weakest one. And this movie seemed like more, they were going more for the, you know, the teenage interaction. And I thought that actually worked better than the actual when he was Spider-Man. And what's the deal with, he doesn't wear his mask anymore and there's no more secret identity? That part I didn't like either.
Well, I mean, that's old Spider-Man movies. Like, even when you go back to the Tobey Maguire one, how often is he standing around with his mask off and stuff like that? It's because you're paying a high-priced Hollywood actor who wants to have their face seen more often than in the mask. I mean, that's just unfortunately the price of fame at this point. But like, I would have been interested to see, and it still might happen, you know, how they reconcile the end of Far From Home with the big reveal, with J. Jonah's big reveal. You know, like
that part was cool. That part was cool to me because, you know, I like the old stuff, and I'm like, yes, bringing it back. I mean, that was kind of cool because they brought that back. They have the new with the old.
Right. I mean, and that's the hard part for anybody who's going to be doing a Spider-Man movie, is trying to reconcile the tradition that you and I, as longtime fans who've been reading these stories for 40 years or more, you know, how do you do a Daily Bugle at this point when we know newspapers are dying? Well, like having J. Jonah be like that conspiracy theory online YouTube guy made a ton of sense. Like I like that spin on what J. Jonah Jameson would be. That kind of entertained me. But that's always going to be something like with any of these movies, especially with a character that's as old as this. How do you kind of bring it into a modern age, but still have it feel like the character that you and I have known for all this time?
Now, why do you think they made him bald and didn't bring back the flat top on J. Jonah Jameson?
I'm willing to bet J.K. Simmons was probably like, I'm here for a couple hours. Do I really need to go through all that makeup?
Wow, you think he's that powerful? If the director wanted to him, he could just say, no, I'm not going to do it.
I think that probably would have been one of those things where the director would have been kind of like, yeah, okay, we'll let it slide. I mean, I think the other thing is, again, as much as J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah is, I don't see how you could ever replace him. And so bringing him back.
Perfect casting.
It was. And I feel like this may have been another way of also kind of, here's the character, here's the actor who played the character that you love, but we're going to change it up just a little bit so you don't confuse it with what you saw 10, 15 years ago.
I want to talk to the listeners now. Make sure you guys leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Amish Bee Machine. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We're on Instagram. Like our Facebook page. Don't forget we have powerful merch. AmishBabyMachine.com. Check out our merch. If you want to support us, a great way to support us is Patreon, patreon.com. Or also we have links on AmishBabyMachine.com. Now, Sean, how can the listeners enjoy your podcast? Where should they check you out?
I am one of the co-hosts of the Pittsburgh Nerd Podcast. We're pretty easy to find. We're on most podcatchers. Just give a search to Pittsburgh Nerd, and you should be able to find us pretty easily. We're also on the Twitter and the Facebook. Just search Pittsburgh Nerd, and you will find us again rather easily. You'll see our lovely logo that we have never been able to merchandise like you have. Powerful
logo. Classic microphone. We enjoy it. Reminds me of the Yeti microphone that is omnipotent in the podcast world.
That's what I had my artist base it off of.
Now I want to get back into Spider-Man. This is going to be a Spider-Man powerful show today. All Spider-Man all the time.
Indeed. Go
on and on. I get sick about reboots and all this and rehashing and remakes. But I would like to see like a John Romita Spider-Man. I'd like to see a reboot of back in the Silver Age, like the look, the feel of that. And I want the Green Goblin to come back and have him actually look like the Green Goblin.
No, I agree. I would love to see the Green Goblin done right. I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that's Spider-Man's Joker in many ways. Like,
yes, exactly.
It's his most powerful foe. And you'd love to see that character really done right. And I hope it could be done. Like I would also love to see this version of Spider-Man take on the Kingpin from Daredevil.
Now, who would play that? You're saying the actor?
Well, if you go back to the Daredevil TV show, which was on Netflix and was recently canceled unceremoniously, Vincent D'Onofrio.
Powerful.
Like I really loved his version of Kingpin. I thought he played it perfectly. And it's one of the, again, like, with Spider-Man coming into the MCU, it's one of those things I would have loved to have seen D'Onofrio reprise that character and take on, like be the guy who hires Kraven the Hunter to take on Spider-Man or something. Like, something all those. I'd love to have seen that version of Kingpin in a Spider-Man movie.
Keeping with the theme, the letter K, how about Kraven the Hunter? Who would you have play Kraven the Hunter?
That's a really good question. Like off the top of my head, I would probably go with somebody maybe a little bit older.
Yes, he's got to be a big, hairy dude. You know what I mean? It can't be some an older dude, powerful, strapping.
I'm going to keep it local here to Pittsburgh, and I'm going to take Joe Manganiello.
Yes, I'll go with that. Another powerful Italian, D'Onofrio, and
Yes.
Italians are powerful.
Yeah, but I mean, like he was a guy. He was supposed to play Deathstroke in the DC universe, and now that that's been scrapped, he can maybe ply his wares elsewhere.
Now that we're on the subject of supervillains, who are
Yes.
your top Spider-Man supervillains?
Okay, top Spider-Man supervillains. Okay, well, I'm going to defy you once again. I'm going to go. Number 5 is Mysterio. I always liked the character because I thought I liked the fact that he was a bit of a shyster. Like, I kind of dug that he didn't have super abilities, but yet he was using his knowledge of special effects and stuff to try to pull off these crimes and make himself out to be something he really wasn't. So I always kind of dug that character because of that. At number 4, I'm going to go with the Vulture. Both the classic version from back in the day, but also I really like the Keaton version. I thought like that version of the character again made sense in the cinematic universe, and I thought Michael Keaton was just top notch in that performance.
Well, anything he does, he's powerful in.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the Vulture is another unusual one that the average person wouldn't pick. Why do you like the Vulture?
I think again, like when you look back at like, especially like in the early days, like in the when I was reading comics in the 70s and the early 80s, as a kid, like he was just an odd looking kind of character. I liked because he had the bald head, he had the big nose, kind of beakish looking. He had the crazy green costume with the feathers, but I also like the fact that like he was a guy who flew, and he gave like a completely different type of fight to Spider-Man, where now instead of being on the ground and having a guy on the ground that Spider-Man would fight, like he was a guy who usually took to the sky, and you got a lot of like really cool action shots of Spider-Man swinging on the web, taking him on in fights and stuff like that. So I always the character was always kind of neat in my opinion, from that standpoint.
No, what was his origin story?
We're gonna have to look that up because I don't remember.
Keep talking. I'm looking it up.
Okay. Well, while you look that up, I'm gonna go with my number 3 Spider-Man villain. I am going to go with Electro.
Great choice.
Again, I'm a guy who grew up, my mornings I would watch before school. I would watch that 1966 Spider-Man cartoon, and I always remember Electro with the big goofy looking, electric bolt on his head, looking goofy, and he had cool powers, but he had a crazy looking costume that like as a kid just kind of drew me in. What
a great show. It affected so many kids' lives. Theme song, everything about it. I mean, it had the feel of Spider-Man and the characters.
Oh yeah.
And the simplistic animation, I actually appreciate it. That's just a great show. And in the banter, like, to me, the new Spider-Mans, they need more of the wisecracking Spider-Man. More of like a Deadpool. The villains is always the back and forth, hey, Spider-Man. And it's like, he had some joke, the Scorpion, and what's that? He's free. In melodramatic, the music. I mean, if they could incorporate that into it and, not make it cheesy, but just embrace it, that'd be fucking fantastic. Yeah, Electro is fantastic.
I don't know if you remember, but around that same time, there were also 4 other cartoons that they did in that same style. One for Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. But they were like all like they weren't like the full half hour. It would be like an adventure hour where you get like 1 15-minute cartoon of each.
They had, and then what was the Spider-Man? What was the later series? Was when he was with Iceman and that fire chick? Oh,
that was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Yes, and His Amazing Friends.
Yes.
And then they had the Fantastic Four, but the Human Torch was too threatening to the kids, so they had to add the little robot.
Yeah, little Herbie.
Herbie. Okay, here, I found the origin.
Okay.
So he was a former electronics engineer who was once a business partner of Gregory Bestman. So one day after creating a flight harness Toombs eagerly rushed into Bestman's office to share the happy news. However, Bestman was not there, and Toombs discovered he was embezzling funds. Let me fast forward here. So he got pissed at him. He wrecked the business, and then he discovered the harness also granted him super strength. He then decided to turn to crime professionally and became the Vulture. So he gets all his power from the suit, the harness.
Okay. Yeah.
So we got Electro.
So, yeah, I mean, that's Electro. And then at 2 is Doc Ock.
Dr. Octopus.
Yes. And again, just a great villain. Just a really good foil to Spider-Man, because it was, with the arms and everything that kind of went along with that. Like those were always great fights, and just a really just interesting character that Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created. As far as the look and everything about him, like I always liked Doc Ock, and then lastly is the Green Goblin, because again he is essentially the Joker, to Spider-Man's Batman.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. His bag of tricks. I mean, the pumpkin bombs, his little finger shooting out sparks.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but he originally flew around on a broom, and then he went to the glider.
I vaguely remember that. Like I don't want to tell you for sure, but I remember when I was a little kid, I had these they were like paperback books. They weren't trade paperbacks like we see today with comic books. They were like regular paperback books, but it was like they would be like collections of like the first 5 issues of Spider-Man or the first 5 issues of Fantastic Four. That's like where I got my comic book education when I was a kid from my dad. Like he'd buy these 10-cent comic books for me and let me read them. And so I vaguely remember him being on a broom at first before switching to the glider, but that was so long ago. I can't say for certain.
No, it was powerful though. Yeah, the Green Goblin, the whole story, Norman Osborn and his kid. Gwen Stacy getting killed. I mean, the drama there, great character. I mean, that's got to be number one.
Yeah, I mean, like you talk about like the history of Spider-Man. The death of Uncle Ben clearly is important, and one of those few characters in comic book history that's never come back. But the other side of that is Gwen Stacy, the death of Gwen Stacy, and how that affected Spider-Man. And for years upon years upon years, like I'm reading comic books in the 80s, and they're still referring back to the death of Gwen Stacy, and it was 2 amazing little storylines that affected that character and made it into what he is.
No, I got to go with Sandman in there. I love Sandman.
I respect that choice. Yeah,
and I love how he always wearing the same thing, kind of like the Hulk always wears purple jeans.
Yeah, always had that goofy striped shirt.
Yes, and what's weird too? A lot of Spider-Man villains I like are super powerful villains that hooked up with Hulk, like Rhino.
Yeah,
like Rhino was epic. And also Juggernaut. Juggernaut, you wouldn't think, but he got into a lot of fights with Juggernaut. Yeah,
there was always a lot of crossover, especially in the early days, like with Spider-Man and like the X-Men or the Fantastic Four. Like, there was a lot more crossover back then, even with the villains. Like Juggernaut would show up for a couple episodes in Spider-Man, and then they go back to X-Men. You'd be like, holy heck, I can't believe it, it's Juggernaut.
Another one of my favorite kind of a crossover is the Absorbing Man, Crusher Creel. That guy, classic. It's a big bald dude swinging that ball and chain, and his abilities. He'd always, always absorb and turn into whatever was near him. What's weird is he would fight Thor a lot, also too. Absorbing Man sure got around as a supervillain.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel did a really good job, especially with like the powerful ones. I could just imagine like the guys in that old Marvel pool bin back in the day, like just being like, what would happen if we put Absorbing Man against Thor? I don't know. Let's figure that out. I mean, like I feel like that was kind of the mentality back then. Like now it's like, well, these guys are these guys' characters, so you can't cross them over with another one. But back then I feel like it was just like, yeah, they're all Marvel characters. We'll just switch them around whenever we need a new villain for Spider-Man or the X-Men to face,
Now that we mentioned your ultimate top of the supervillains, tell me some of the ones that are the lamest ones you can think of. Because it's so funny, Spider-Man had some of the coolest supervillains and then some of the dumbest ones.
Oh, my.
I got to go with the kangaroo. It's got to be one of the dumbest ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I forget some of the dumber ones just because they don't stick with me.
It's one that's really popular, and it's a whole Batman thing, too. Like if you say Green Goblin's a Joker, is the Black Cat. I don't know why she's so popular, but...
I mean, I think it's a good character. I just, it's like one of those characters where it's like, clearly she's a ripoff of Catwoman, and then they try to play off that, will they, won't they kind of romance aspect with them. And I get it. You're right. Like, but I think at the same time, like if you just kind of take that character on her own and take her out of Spider-Man, I think she could be a very interesting character when she's written right.
Now, who else do you think? Who are some other ones that are weak?
You could look at Kraven the Hunter, and you could go, okay, that is a wackadoo costume that I don't see how you can make that work today. But yet I can see how that costume could somehow be made to work today too. So but like I said, like some of his weaker, like C-list villains, they don't stick with me like they do with some of the other comics, just because I read a lot of Spider-Man, but it wasn't like my obsession like it was with like Batman, and like how I can go like through some of his C-list villains and be like, oh yeah, he's a joke, or he's a one-off, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Batman had so much more history too, so many more years.
Right.
So going on with Spider-Man, I mean, do you think this Sony Disney thing is just going to be a blip, or is it going to actually cause some changes?
Well, okay. I think you have to think of it this way. If this is a permanent stop, you have major changes that you have to make to the Marvel Cinematic Universe because of where you left off with Far From Home. Like, you kind of gave Peter Parker the keys to the store with the glasses, and you've kind of positioned him for the next phase to be the next Iron Man. Like, that was kind of the whole point of that movie, is him trying to learn to live up to being Tony Stark and feeling he's worthy of those reins that in many ways Tony kind of hands to him. So if that's the case, if he's out of the MCU, then you've got a lot of rethinking to do of what the future of the franchises are, because you kind of put yourself in a position where the linchpin is supposed to be Spider-Man. The other side of that, though, is if it stays permanent, what is Sony going to do? Because they've already launched, their quote unquote Spider-Verse with Venom. Venom 2 is being made. The great Andy Serkis is going to direct Venom 2. We also have right now Morbius is in production with Jared Leto in that title role. Speaking of lame villains that I'm not quite sure how they got a movie, there's one right there.
It is weird of all the ones they picked.
Yeah. So I mean, you're trying to create this Spider-Verse that now you can have Spider-Man in, and so like, how do you shoehorn him into that? Do you introduce him in Venom 2 somehow, and then from there start making your own movies? Because the thing I don't want, like, if this is the case, if this is what's going to happen, I don't need to see the origins of Spider-Man again. Like, and that's one of the things I did like about how Marvel handled it, You didn't have to see him get bit by the radioactive spider and learn how to be Spider-Man. It was kind of like, okay, this happened. You got like a really brief description of him talking to his buddy Ned about it, and they moved on from it. Like I don't need to go through that all over again. I feel like just get me into the character, and I feel like doing it kind of the same way Marvel did by introducing him in another movie like Venom 2 might help expedite that process.
That being said, would you see a Spider-Man movie that's animated like the Spider-Verse, but it would be, like I said, like a old school Silver Age John Romita looking film?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I would love to see them. I think the great thing about Into the Spider-Verse, part of it was the animation and the animation style, and it had a comic book feel to it. A lot of times you could see like the dots like back in the old school days, how that would kind of the print would look and stuff like that. So I feel like, if they were to do something where they were to like kind of like take that old school animation from the 66 Spider-Man series and kind of give it a modern update, but still have that feel to it. Yeah, I'd be all in on something like that.
Yeah, you're right. You got to have the soul of the old feel, because if it comes out too generic, too CGI looking, then you lose that soul. But you're right. If you can kind of give the feel of hand drawn, even though it's not hand drawn, you're right. Then it's going to bring you into that comic book world, and it's going to be like you're actually going into the comic book instead of having a movie that reminds you of the comic book versus just going right. Like we were talking earlier on the last podcast about the costumes, how they have to change the costumes and make them leather and make them more believable, even though you have this unbelievable character. So if they somehow could blend the film with the feeling of the comic book, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, I think, like you said, I mean, that style, like that style of animation, and like, you would see, like, I mean, you could tell it was like somebody like, just like, we're going to draw this over a static background that never moves. But, I mean, it was like, it had a fun feel to it that even as a kid, I was like, well, that's not great, but I really like it. And I'm not saying that's how it has to look like, but like you're right. Like that hand drawn feel would be really important. Like I'd love to see something like that. Just to like really get back to the roots of what Spider-Man is.
No, absolutely. Get that rich, saturated color.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful.
And even like the villains, like you could like, I mean, I would love to see on the big screen, like Electro with the big goofy headpiece.
God, wasn't Jamie Foxx the worst Electro ever? What were they thinking? There's nothing about him that says Electro.
I think a lot of what they were trying to do, if you go back and you look at like when Marvel did the Ultimate series, and they had Ultimate Spider-Man, I think that's the kind of the look and feel they were trying to go for with Jamie Foxx, and they didn't quite pull it off.
But he ended up looking frozen, like he was ice, not electricity.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like there's a lot of things I like about Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man 2, but the look of Electro was not one of them. I agree. Like it was like they went to go for like a translucent look because he was electrified.
Yeah, exactly.
And they couldn't quite pull it off.
No, it came off looking like ice. There's nothing about it.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's going to be like, it should be like lightning bolts, like Thor. I mean, he's got that much power. It shouldn't, you're right. It shouldn't look like some translucent, like he's just got static electricity going on him or something. And speaking of power, did you have a powerful time tonight on the most powerful podcast ever created?
It has been a powerful time. This has been, again, it's always a lot of fun. And it's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I needed to talk about Spider-Man, and I know you're a powerful expert in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so I had to have you on the show, and I really appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here, and I try to keep up. It's what we do.
Awesome. Well, guys, we really appreciate everyone that listens. We appreciate Sean being on this show. And until next time, you've just enjoyed the Amish Baby Machine Pop Culture Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Amish Baby Machine Pop Culture Podcast. It is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and everywhere else fine podcasts are found. Please support our podcast through Patreon and shop our merch at AmishBabyMachine.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. This has been an Amish Baby Machine production.